name is Janiese. I was a second-class petty officer, or E5. My job specialty was cryptographic technician. My first duty station was USS Abraham Lincoln out of Alameda, California. The next place I served was the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C. And then lastly was Fleet Training Center in Mayport, Florida. My grandfather was in the Army, my dad was in the Army. I came from this family of that, and I felt it not only my obligation, but I thought it was kind of my duty as an American, and I grew up in that time and very prideful of our country and the such, and I was the only, we don't have boys, so it was me, so I did it, and that's what I wanted to do. My mother freaked out. I joined, and I did not tell her. So, because when I had tried to go in after high school, she just did not want that. I was also the first generation of my family to go to college. So that was my mom's thing. Because I was a good student, she wanted me to go to college, and going to the military just wasn't. She also grew up in the 60s, so there was lingering ideas of Vietnam, and about her daughter was going to go to college. So I literally didn't tell her for like 2 weeks. So my entire family knew except for my mother, and then she literally freaked out. And then after I went and I was in my schooling, because you go to boot camp and then you go to a specialty school, she really became supportive and was great about the whole thing. But my dad was awesome. My grandfather cried. So that was, my grandfather and I were very close. So to me that was like a really kind of humbling thing to have your grandfather cry. I went to Recruit Training Command in Orlando, Florida. That was the only place that they had trained women at that time. So there were men and women being trained together. We were integrated companies. Chicago was the other boot camp for the Navy at that time, but women just went to Orlando. That was 9.5 weeks of training, physical training and firefighting. My first school, I was a cryptographic technician, and then my second bit of school came later on, which was shipboard training. But when I initially went to that school, they call it an A school, women were not allowed to serve on combatant ships. So literally I was going to go to that school and I would be stationed stateside, or I would be stationed overseas. The firefighting though literally killed me, because you get your boots wet and you have blisters, and so that's one of the most memorable things. But it was also probably one of the funnest times of my life, and that sounds really strange when you're waking up at 4 a.m. and marching for 12 hours a day, but you've got a purpose and you've got something to accomplish, and it was good. When you pulled into port when you were overseas, it was let's go have some fun. We did some. When we were in the Persian Gulf, when we pulled into Dubai, United Arab Emirates, they would have tours. You could go sand skiing. You could go on, we went cave jumping in these oases in the deserts of Oman. So I was always looking to do all kinds of interesting things. Hong Kong, I did some of the best shopping in the world. I shipped home at least 6 boxes worth of clothes, because a lot of the clothes was produced there and it was super cheap. Singapore was the same thing. I went to lots of gardens, and so my thing was whenever I was overseas, I was going wherever I could possibly go. Every ship that you go on has the same distinctive smell. When I go to the ships down here at the waterfront, they have the same smell. It's a fuel smell, and on the carriers they use JP5, which is jet propulsion fuel number 5. But on the other ones, they also use some other jet propulsion fuels, jet being planes, but they have other equipment on board that uses some of the same things. And every time I walk on any ship, it takes me back to the very first time I stepped on board with my sea bag walking onto the Lincoln. It has that smell. First time I put my uniform, I was excited. But when I got out off the airplane in San Francisco, you come with your big sea bag, and nobody, and here you are going to this strange place, and you have to trust that the people that are driving you are going to get you there, because the San Francisco airport is an hour away from your ship. So they send people to come get you, and I just can remember standing on the pier and just looking up and just thinking, where have I come from? This little girl from Cheektowaga, and here I am gonna, set out on that. So just being scared and the not knowing of what was going to be. I just remember being so excited. Number one, that I was in this part of the world, and number two, that we were actually going to be really doing our mission. And that was enforcing the sanctions against Iraq and making sure that they were no longer, torturing the Kurds. They were not going below the 33rd parallel, because that was what our air support was doing. Our pilots were flying the mission to ensure that there was no movement. So every day they would leave the ship and they would fly up to that 33rd parallel to make sure that Saddam Hussein had no forces below that, or moving troops, or also that there were no ships going in, supply ships to replenish supplies for him, or leaving with oil exports, or sheeps or dates, because the three biggest exports from Iraq are sheep, because it's a staple in their diet, dates, which is another staple in their diet, and then the oil. So that would bring the largest amount of money to Iraq. So when you come to a place where you know nobody, you make friends really quick. Good friends takes a little bit, but you make friends really quick because you're all in the same position. Probably my best friend ever is, she is a command master chief, currently right now stationed on the USS Harry S. Truman, and she's the command master chief of one of the I believe it's helicopter squadrons. So when we were there, our bunks were near each other. We were the best of friends. We did everything together when we pulled into port. We explored all these cities. We went sand skiing. We went on Oasis things. And she continues to be my friend up until today. After we left, she didn't finish our cruise with us. She was able to transfer early. She moved to Japan at that time. She went from our ship and transferred to Japan. She had a baby and her husband. And then about 6 years later, she was transferring back to Washington, D.C., where I was stationed at that time. And she came and stayed with me. And it was like we had never not been friends. It was just, we were friends, and she lived with me for about 4 months while all of her stuff got moved, and we still talk to today. And your friends are just, those are the best times of your lives. I know everyone says that when you're young, but they really are. I mean, I have another group, Debbie, all these girls that now, thanks to Facebook, you can be friends with, but just close, having a good time, exploring the world, being, learning about new things. So. And Marie, I just so affectionately think of her all the time, because she was just, we had the blast together. I was a girl that thought I could do whatever I wanted to do. It was 1991. My mother had been working, but my mom also stayed home when I was little. She went back to work. So this idea of the glass ceiling that I'm sure you probably heard about was so far removed from me. I was just like, whatever. There's no way I can do whatever I want to do. So when I went into the military, I didn't realize all the limitations that were on you. And it wasn't evident at first, but that very first time when I got to that school and they were looking for volunteers, I had friends that I was in school with. There was, I think I said 12 of us, in that group. Half of us were women. None of them wanted to volunteer. I'm like, are you kidding? Why would you not want to? This is why I came in the military, to do these things. And it was a big deal at my school when I got selected. Like, I have a plaque in the building because I was the first woman to do this job. Where you think, whatever. But then when I got on board the ship, it was so different. And it was very strange, because I had always grew up with having guy friends, but men did not want to talk to you. And it's very weird. You go on a ship with 5,000 people and 500 are women. So the numbers are there, but many men were scared to talk to us. They were fearful of us. They thought that we were going to accuse them of, sexual harassment and all these things. So it was a very big wake-up call to me that people acted like this, because I never grew up like this. They came up with this new code, how they were going to train people, and it was red light, green light, yellow light. Which, what I think was really interesting was they trained women differently than they trained men. They didn't put us all together and give us the same training. So when we walked on board that ship for the first time, women on combatant ship, you had men that literally that you were supposed to work with that wouldn't even look at you, because they were afraid that you were going to say red light and then they would get in trouble and lose their careers. Whereas the women, we didn't see it that way. So to me, it was very eye-opening the limitations that were on us, but the doors that we opened. When you're on board ship, you're not, you think you work 8 hours, here you go home. Well, when you're on board the ship, you have really no place to go. You have your rack. I mean, you can go work out, you can go run on the flight deck sometimes if they're not doing flight ops. Sometimes there'd be a movie, but also remember I told you there's always people sleeping, so you don't necessarily have a place where you can like sit on a couch and chill and watch TV. It just didn't happen. Sundays they would do this. We would have bingo, and they would do all these crazy things on Sundays. So yeah, but you know, you're working sometimes 18 hours, 20 hours a day. So as your shift changed, your normal shift was 12 hours. But if something was going on and we had seen, you know, something crazy, you could work 18, 20 hours, you know, get 4 hours of sleep and then be back at work. So being out to sea is tiring. So we're in the Persian Gulf, and when we had I told you I went to Riyadh, and I stayed in the Air Force headquarters there, in the capital. So we would have exchanges. So we would have Air Force personnel come stay with us because they thought this was a way to build good camaraderie between each other, sharing information and learning what each other does and how we could support them at sea, how they could support us there. Of course, I picked it because I could have a bath and I could stay in a nice condo because I did for like 3 days, and I had a room that was as big as this classroom, you know, when I'm sleeping in a bunk normally with 88 women. But we had some of these Air Force guys come on board the ship, and they also brought Saudi generals with them, Saudi officers with them. So inside where I worked, probably like a 5x5 room, and I had my computer there, and you know, I normally worked with like 6 other people. We all had computer stations, and you know, we had a big table in the middle where we would lay out maps or, you know, pictures that we had taken to look at the intel. So the Air Force guys came on and the Saudi guys came on. We also had this map of the Shatt al-Arab waterway. And this was an important waterway because this was the waterway we were watching to enforce the sanctions. And we had a huge blow-up map just of this waterway on the ceiling. So the Air Force guys come in with the Saudi guys. And the Saudi guys are like, Shatt al-Arab, and they're speaking in Arabic, and we don't know what they're saying, you know, but they have a translator, and they were just so excited over this picture that's black and white of the Shatt al-Arab. So we were just giggling and laughing, you know, all of us were like, and this one guy that I worked with, Gus, he was the most hysterical. Gus and I we would have to strip and wax this one hallway, and it would always be us because we were the lowest men on the totem pole. And literally for the 6 hours that it would take us to strip and wax, because he would just kind of goof around, but we would laugh all the time. So the Saudi guys are in there, and Gus is pretending he's translating what the Saudis are saying, and my chief is like yelling at us like, we can hear you. So that was super funny. So then they take the Saudi guys out to show them another place. Now the other thing is I'm working with highly classified stuff, so we had to like desensitize things. We didn't have a lot of stuff laying around that was classified. But because you're working here, you have all kind of like, you get mail from your family, it's there, we would get care packages. Well, we'd also get Victoria's Secret's catalogs because we're girls, you know, you're shopping. And we had an Air Force general that came, and when they had been stationed in Saudi Arabia, they are not allowed to have, Victoria's Secret's catalogs are considered pornography, okay? So the funny thing was, here us girls are, we got our magazines around, you know, we had like Vogue and other stuff like that, because we would have some downtime to do stuff. And this Air Force general sees them sitting there, and he's like, no, he's like, can I look at these for a little bit? And my chief was so pissed when he left. I'm really, what do you say? No? I mean, this guy's a full-star general. You're not going to tell him he can't look at your magazines, right? So he walks out, and now Gus, the guy that was, you know, making all, he is laughing so hard, and my chief was so pissed. Why do you guys leave this stuff laying around? I don't think it's any big deal. You know, it was a Victoria's Secret catalog. But because they don't get them, he was like, and he'd been there in theater for like 8-9 months, so none of this stuff is seen because that's taboo. You know, women have to be fully covered. So yeah, that was probably the funniest thing. And our chief, still to this day, Fred, my friend who works at the Pentagon, Uncle Fred, we still laugh about that story because he was pissed. The towns that have military in there, very good to military personnel. Christmas, they adopted families, they would adopt sailors, so people would open up their houses on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and invite us in for Christmas dinner. So that was really, really nice, and they just want to hear about your stories, you know, and here I am. We hadn't been on any deployments. We don't really have stories, but they were so nice and so generous to us. So that was one thing that I really remembered. You can't wait to get out, but I miss my life. Like, I still to this day, there are days that I don't not think about it because I had the most fun. It's such a different type of, you have such responsibility and you know, dedication and focus, and you have a mission. Not that teaching isn't like that, but it's just a totally different thing. It was the best times of my life, honestly. So I was really sad, but I also knew myself I could not be a mom and be on active duty, because I had told you earlier about women that had to leave their 3 months old, 6 months old. There's no way I could leave my children for a year. Like, I knew that was my limit. Different time, different place, maybe, yeah, but I was ready to get out. I was an okay student. Because I wasn't always focused. So it was life-changing, and the fact that once I made this commitment, it changed every other aspect of my life. I was going to be the best that I could. I told you I studied for those advancements exams. So then the military was also great because it paid for a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So one of my original things was I didn't have money to pay for it. I mean, I got a 4.0. I mean, in college, you know, that was not something that I had thought of when I was in high school. I was a good student, but I wasn't a great student. So it just gave me a perspective. I grew up so much. You have so much responsibility on you, and you probably see it's reflected in my teaching. I'm very, you know, structured. I have high expectations, you know. I'm that way with my kids. That's the part of me that I think that I went in there because it really gave me a focus. It gave me a goal. So, and it was something that I was proud of. So I changed that too. What happens on the ship is when you cross the equator, you go, and this is a sea tradition that goes back hundreds of years. In the 1600s, the sailors, as they crossed, you know, as they sailed around the world, when they would cross the equator, they would have these same type of ceremonies to make you an official shellback. So we were going to become golden shellbacks because we were going to cross the equator on our way home from our deployment. So we were on the international date line around the Philippines where the equator is. So that made us a little bit cooler because we were golden. We were doing both of these things at the same time. So what happens is at like 4 o'clock in the morning, the ship just goes to minimum operations. Of course, we're not doing anything major at that point in time, but they take and they hoist the Jolly Roger, which is the pirate flag, up, and that entire day is dedicated to the initiation of pollywogs. So you are a wog. Traditionally, you had to wear all of your clothes on the outside, so your undergarments would be on your uniform, and you would wear your clothes inside out. But because women were on board and we were going through the first bit of initiation with this, we weren't allowed to wear undergarments on the outside. We just could wear things inside out. And then the people that you work with make you little costumes that you could wear. So part of my job was what we would do is we would go up to the flight deck and load some of the codes into the airplanes. So what they had us dress up as these turtles, pretending that we were doing this, and it related to the thing that they were called kicks, and turtles don't really kick and they're really slow, but we had to be fast, so they made up this whole like stupid thing. It was ridiculous, but so you had to dress up, and they would put the oil from the flight deck on your face. So I mean, I was just black. We wore bathing suits underneath our clothes. And it was an entire day. And they would take you up on the flight deck and they would spray you down, and then there were pad eyes on the bottom of the flight deck. Those would be what we chained to keep the airplanes in place or any equipment on the deck. But they would fill them with water, and you had to blow out the pad eyes. So here you are laying on the flight deck, blowing things out. They would just make you do all kinds of crazy things, just silly things at that time. Traditionally, people had been beaten with shillelaghs. Shillelaghs are the fire hoses. but they weren't allowed to touch us with the shillelaghs anymore because that, of course, is hazing, and then women were on board, so it was a bit more strict. But they would have, these salty people over time kind of like gather their things and their props for this initiation. So what they would do is we would all be kind of laying in the room, and we were also in our workspace too, and they would be pounding these shillelaghs on the ground and just making noise, and they'd make us sing, and then we'd have to stand over the side, and we'd have to call Flipper, and we'd have to call, it was just crazy fun stuff. And then you would have to go before King Neptune at his court. So traditionally, King Neptune is the fattest enlisted guy, the chief on board, because chiefs are older and they usually get a big belly. And traditionally, what you'd have to do is you'd have to eat a cherry out of the chief's belly. Well, of course, when women are on board, they don't make you do that. But we had to go before him, and we had to kneel before them. And then you would have to crawl through kind of this labyrinth thing. And if you would crawl through it, then you would become a polywog. But they would make you go through this kind of like obstacle course labyrinth a few times, because they would ask you at the end, what are you, a wog or a shellback? And you'd always answer wog, because all day you're told that you're a wog, because even if you mention shellback, you're like dead, you're like tortured. So finally you get to the end, and finally the third time you're like, what are you, a wog or a shellback? And you're like, oh crap, this is the end, I'm a shellback. But they would have a container that they cut in half that they filled with seawater. So you would have to swim and, kind of get like baptized in this water, and you're officially a shellback at this point. So you could strip off the clothes that they had given to you, and that's why we wore bathing suits, and then they would have a steel beach picnic, they called it. So we would have grills going, and people were playing frisbee, and they would bring out like inflatable pools. So all these people that have been on deployment know all this stuff and bring this stuff. But at the end, then you have, you're initiated, and by the end of the day, my face is just like, my hair has got like JP5 grease. It was just, but it was awesome and super fun. And that's one of my best memories, because my friend Marie that I told you about, I have a picture of the two of us going through initiation. Just a blast. And our admiral had to go through it with us. So that was really cool. The highest ranking guy on the ship is down here with us, lowest ranking. And that part of going through that labyrinth, the kitchen saves food for a few days. So food that gets kind of moldy and smelly. So you have to crawl through that as well. You have to have this horrible breakfast that they make you like green oatmeal, like the and it was just gross, but meant to be fun. But part of also that you get to that when you go through the water, you get that crud off of you for the day, and you're officially now a shellback. So